All right, thank you, Addie, and the worship team for doing a great job on all those songs this morning. Really do appreciate it. I'm sure as you see this picture, you know exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about when Dorothy began her journey down the yellow brick road. She could not imagine that each step she would take as this journey began, it would lead her to more and more danger. The journey began simple enough with a scarecrow, and they became friends. And a while later, they came across a Tin Man frozen in motion as he had his axe raised high in the air. At first, they thought he was a statue, but as they got closer, they could hear noise coming from this Tin Man. And as they got closer, they listened real quietly, and they heard the words, oil can. Oil can. At first they were confused. They didn't understand what he was saying. But then Dorothy saw a nearby oil can. She went and grabbed it, worked on his joints, released him from his rusted prison. And once free, he begins to tell his story. Now, how many of you have actually read the book? Nobody. Okay, a couple hands, 2 hands. Okay, all right. So almost nobody has read the book. I haven't either. I'm actually kind of wanting to read it after I was reading through this particular story. Because the book and the movie take a major departure at this juncture. See, the book sets the dark tone of the plight of this Tin Man. Because we know that he lacked a heart in the movie. But what we don't know is the book tells us the Tin Man was once himself a human man. And he was in love with a beautiful maiden. It was a Tin Man's dream to marry this girl, but he wanted to wait until he could earn enough money to buy them a cottage in the woods. The Wicked Witch hated not Tin Man at the time, but the man's love for this girl, and so she cast spells upon him that caused him injuries. One by one, his limbs would need replaced with artificial ones made of tin. But at first this seemed like an advantage, because then he could work more efficiently, like a machine. With a heart of love and limbs that never grew tired, he would earn enough money in no time to buy them that cottage. However, one day the witch made the woodsman's axe slip in his hands, and it split his body in half. Yeah, it's a little graphic, a little gory, but it's what the book says, okay? And when they put the man back together, they gave him a body of tin, but they did not put in a heart. He could move around just fine, but he lost his love for the girl. He became indifferent whether he married her or not. All he really worried about was cutting wood and keeping his joints lubricated with oil. But one day, as he went out to work in the woods, he forgot the oil can, and it began to rain, and he froze for a year. I want to read a short paragraph to you from the book as the woodsman continues his story. It was a terrible thing to undergo, but during the year I stood there, I had time to think that the great loss I had known was the loss of my heart. While I was in love, I was the happiest man on earth. But no one can love who has not a heart. And so I am resolved to ask Oz to give me one. If he does, I will go back to the Munchkin Maiden and marry her. Both Dorothy and the Scarecrow had been greatly interested in the story of the Tin Woodsman, and now they knew why he was so anxious to get a new heart. All the same, said the Scarecrow, I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one. I shall take the heart, returned the Woodsman, for brains do not make one happy, and happiness is the best thing in the world. So notice there was a man who was once alive, really alive, and he was in love. But after a series of events, his humanity was reduced to efficiency. He no longer had a heart and a passion for life. He was a machine. He was a hollow man. But at first he didn't even notice he was hollow. At first he didn't even notice that the heart missing was a problem. He was so efficient at his job, he didn't even think about love. Also notice who brought the disaster upon the Tin Woodsman. It was the Wicked Witch. This is an important reminder for all of us that we have a real enemy who knows how vital our heart is. And our enemy will do everything in his power to make sure that our hearts are destroyed. For if the enemy can disable or deaden our hearts, the enemy has effectively blocked the plan of God for you and for me. Because God has created a world that he wants where love reigns supreme. By taking out your heart, the enemy takes out you. I would say one area that the Christian churches have historically missed an important issue is the issue of the heart. I think the Christian churches have been excellent at knowledge and truth. We hold those values closely, and we absolutely should. But often we hold the values of knowledge and truth at the expense of emotions and the heart. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived, and here's what he wrote. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say ignore your heart, ignore your emotions. He said guard it, for it determines the course of your life. So we should not be repressing our hearts or ignoring them. Instead of ignoring our hearts or becoming too cynical of our own emotions, we need to guard and protect our hearts. It's a valuable part of who we are and who God created us to be. The problem with the heart is it's susceptible to being deceived. And Jeremiah words it perfectly in 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? I don't think it means that the heart is necessarily evil. It means that the heart is easily deceived. The heart is easily deceived. So the cure we're looking for this morning is not to ignore our heart and become a hollow tin man focused on efficiency, productivity, and busyness, which I think a lot of people are doing today. We need to quit sleepwalking through life and understand the value of our hearts. And then we need to understand the challenge that our hearts face and what a heart truly alive in Christ actually looks like. So let's begin with simply this, the value of the heart. I don't know if you realize it or not, but the heart is talked about a lot in the Bible. I mean, the heart is talked about a lot in the Bible, almost more than any other topic. The heart is talked about more than works of service. It's talked about more than belief and obedience, more than money and more than worship. Maybe God knows something about the heart that we have forgotten. In fact, let's take time to look at a few verses here about the heart. Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. You remember Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment in all the law? You remember what he quoted, don't you? He quoted this one. Now, John Eldridge makes an observation. He can't take it too far, and he doesn't either. But what is listed first? Heart. It's interesting, it's not with our soul, and there's other translations that use mind. It's not with our strength. The first quality listed to love God is with our hearts. Again, we don't want to read too much into that, but it is interesting nonetheless. All right, let's look at another verse. 1 Samuel 16:7. Man looks at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. You might remember Samuel was charged to anoint the new king after Saul had disobeyed God. And so he went to Jesse's house to anoint one of his sons, and he saw Eliab. He was big, he was strong, he was handsome. You know, something like me, I guess. And they looked, and Samuel looked at him and said, oh, this is the Lord's anointed for sure. And God said, no, man looks at outward appearance, the Lord looks at the heart. Luke chapter 12, verse 34, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Treasure is, your heart will be also. What do you hold dear? What do you seek in life? What do you desire? Whatever that treasure is, your heart's going to follow it. That's why it's so important that we learn to treasure the right things. All right, let's keep going on here. We have Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So we're trusting God how? With our hearts. All right, let's keep reading here. Psalm 119:11. Your word I have treasured in my heart that I might not sin against you. So the basis for not sinning against God is loving God's word in our hearts. Now, there's an important aspect of the mind. That's just not the focus of today's message, but I just want you to realize that. But it is important that we understand the heart for what the Bible says about it. Let's keep reading here. Matthew 15:8. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. So you can say the right things, but if your heart's not in it, it's far from God. Interesting. 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. Now that's just a small sampling of all the verses that deal with the heart. According to the Bible, the heart can be troubled, wounded, pierced, grieved, and broken. And Psalm 34 reminds us that the Lord is close to the broken-hearted. Thankfully, we also read that the heart can be cheerful, glad, merry, joyful, and rejoicing. We also know the heart can be whole, or it can be divided. We know that by using the phrase often, well, part of me wants to do this, and part of me doesn't want to do it. It can be wise, and it can be foolish. The heart can be steadfast, true, stout, upright, and valiant. And the heart can also be scared, cowardly, melt like wax, wandering, forgetful, dull, stubborn, proud, and hard. But according to Jesus, the heart also can have one more quality. A heart can be pure. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Now that is a very interesting blessing attached to such a phrase, because we know, according to the Scriptures, that you can't look upon God and live as a sinful person, because God is perfection and you are not. That's just something that doesn't work. But Jesus says if your heart is pure, you will see God. The Bible sees the heart as the source of creativity, courage, and conviction. It's the source of faith, hope, and love. It's a wellspring of life. The very essence of our existence is found in our hearts. I think we're understanding the value of the heart at this point. So let's transition to another thought, and that is the challenge of the heart. The heart has some serious challenges with it. And let's look at it in two ways. In life, we have to process everything in two ways, and it's through either reason or emotion. That's it. Two ways, reason and emotion. We don't process life any other way. Those are the things that happen. The mind receives information, and then our hearts go through the emotional process of it. For example, the mind reasons that 212 degrees Fahrenheit is the boiling point of water. The mind understands that the Earth is the third planet from the sun. The mind receives this information, but it doesn't have anything to do with how you react to it or what you do with that information. The heart knows and wrestles with reality. For example, maybe your son is missing in combat. That's a reality that your mind understands, but your heart deals with the emotions of it. Or the belief that God has heard your prayers. Or that your child is getting married. Or that you are loved. See, the mind takes in and processes information, and it's a beautiful gift from God, but the mind is indifferent. Your mind tells you it's 2 o'clock in the morning and your daughter's not home from her date. But your heart says you're either worried, scared, or very angry, or some combination of all three. Why do so many people dread Monday mornings but say, thank God it's Friday? It's because their heart's not into their work. Their hearts are far from it. And this is also true in our relationships, especially in marriage and in parent-child relationships. Why do so many marriages fail? It's because one partner or both partners no longer have a heart for making it work. They understand mentally, yeah, I made these vows, but emotionally and all the things that go with the heart, they're just not in it anymore. Why are so many people struggling today? Because they've lost heart. Why are so many people unable to break free from addictions? Because somewhere along the way, in a moment of carelessness or desperation, they gave their hearts away and they can't seem to get it back. And so there's this struggle between those that live from the mind and those that live from the heart. Think about it. If you and maybe your spouse or a good friend of you, you just kind of clash a lot, I think it's because one of you probably lives from the mind and one of you lives from the heart. And I think, here's one way I can illustrate this very well. Some of you absolutely love your pets. I mean, you absolutely love your pets. And when your pet passes away, it's like you lost a family member, and you cry about it, and you're upset about it, and you get choked up just thinking about it. And I mentally understand that. Emotionally, I don't get it at all. I grew up on a farm where we lost a lot of pets. I mean a lot of pets, and sometimes in front of our eyes. And so I am just numb to it anymore. I'm the only sibling in my family that feels this way, so don't judge anybody in my family. This is a me thing and not an anybody else thing. But it's just where I'm at in life. In fact, this morning here, here's what you're missing if you don't participate in worship practice. We had a little downtime, and so we were talking about elephants, because why not? And we knew that Grant's Farm lost their elephants a couple years ago, and so the question became is, what do you do with a carcass that big? And so I'm like, well, you burn it. And Nicole just about went in tears, just me saying that. That's so terrible, you need to bury it. So you know how big the hole would have to be to bury such a thing? And so we looked it up online. Guess what you do? You cut it up and you burn it, okay? So I'm sorry if you're upset. It's not our policy at Crestwood Christian Church to cut up elephants and burn them. Call PETA if you have an issue and send them to Grant's Farm. It's not us, okay? This is just what happens. But I understand it. But my heart's not into it. Likewise, I could probably find something I'm emotional about and you could care less about. And you're like, well, mentally, I guess it makes sense, but emotionally, I'm just not invested in this at all. And so whenever you get two people together, where one person mentally gets it, but emotionally is disconnected, and the other person's so emotional about it, it is just a recipe for clashing together. And that's really the struggle, especially, like I say, in marriages and parent-child relationships. One spouse says, you are so cold and uncaring. And the other one says, you're so high-strung and emotional. Chill out. And the children, perhaps the number one struggle of all children, is to feel, their biggest struggle is they feel misunderstood by mom and dad. And when mom and dad don't get you, or they don't seem to be connected to you, it just saps them of life and energy. And they're going to go looking for it somewhere else. And that's when they start to make some really bad decisions. The heart is the source of emotions, but we've been tricked into believing that the heart is emotion. That's why many people feel dead on the inside as a result. Many people have made a wreck of their lives living for emotion, thinking they're living for their heart. But they've never stopped to consider whether that action was good, healthy, or moral. The Bible talks a lot about how the heart is where we process and think, just as we do with the mind. Equating the heart as only emotion is like saying love is a feeling. Well, love can produce wonderful feelings at times. It can also produce devastating feelings at times. But we all know that love is more than a feeling. In fact, Jesus demonstrated this while in the garden. You remember, his feelings were, man, Lord, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to face this crucifixion, torture, and death. But then he said, not my will and yours be done. We know his love for us allowed him to face such a difficult death. Love, in fact, helped steel his resolve to face his fear of an unjust torture and death. Love is so much more than emotion. And anytime you equate it to emotion only, you are missing the value of the heart. Chip Dodd says it well, emotions are the voice of the heart. Emotions are the voice of the heart. That's how your heart expresses itself in your personality and who you are. When we cry at a funeral, or when we celebrate a grandchild's birth, the heart brings out the fullness of life. The challenge of the heart is to find the happy medium between the rational mind and the emotion in the heart. And too many of us will fall to one or the other. But rarely do we strike the proper balance. But Jeremiah 17:10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind. Both of these are so valuable. God will not only judge you based on what you know, but on what your heart desires as well. We can't ignore one for the sake of the other. We have to find balance. There's a working balance. And when we start to figure it out, when we start to get the balance right of keeping the extreme emotions of our heart in check, while also challenging our mind and mental state to accept some of the emotions of the heart, and we find that balance, we begin to experience a truly alive heart. When your heart is truly alive, it is a gift from God. And we know what it's like to have a heart that's out of control and it aches and it hurts. And we know what it's like to have a heart of stone where we just don't care, we're disconnected. But when we get it connected together in the right way, in the right balance, it is truly a gift from God. The wisest man who ever lived was Solomon. And when he became king, God said, ask me anything and I will grant it to you. He could have asked for wealth. He could have asked for power. He could have asked for anything. And what did he say? He said, give me a discerning heart. He asked for a heart of wisdom. Think about it. We don't often equate the heart with wisdom. We equate the mind with wisdom. But what we see in the Bible is actually the heart becomes a very wise place. When the shepherds came to see baby Jesus, it says Mary pondered all this in her heart. She thought about it in her heart. Hebrews tells us the Word of God will judge your thoughts and the attitudes of the heart. So what are the qualities of a truly alive heart? What's the measuring stick we can use to know if our hearts are on the right track? Well, one measuring stick of the truly alive heart is what we believe about God. What do you believe about God in your heart? Romans chapter 10, I think, paints a pretty good picture for us on this. If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As scriptures say, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. I think that's a very powerful verse that shows us how central our heart is in our relationship with God. James tells us that the demons believe in God and shudder. Mentally, they get it, but their hearts refuse and reject God. In John chapter 14, Jesus tells his disciples, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, you believe also in me. You see this important connection between belief and the heart. A truly alive heart understands and believes that Jesus is Lord. You can't follow God or his will for your life if your heart is not in it. Jesus said, as we quoted earlier, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So a truly alive heart connects to God. There's also three other elements I want to cover very briefly with us this morning, and that is this. A truly alive heart embraces the past. Embraces the past. Frederick Buechner said this, why is a fragrance in the air? A certain passage of a song. An old photograph falling out of the pages of a book. The sound of someone's voice in the hall. Why does it make your heart leap and fill your eyes with tears? And the answer is your heart is a storehouse of memories. We have memories not only in our brains, but they're written on our hearts. And the values of the memories on your hearts are not quantifiable with words. In fact, in Moses' last sermon to Israel, he warned them, be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things you have seen or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. See that? Be careful that you don't let them slip from your heart. So there's the mental connection, there's the emotional connection. It all comes together. Memory is a vital function of the heart. Whenever I've talked with couples who are going through marriage struggles and I work with them, one of my first practices, usually in the first session, I say, what was your happiest moment? What was it? And they'll say, well, I don't know. And they're hemming and hawing because they're really mad at each other at the time, so they don't want to be happy. And so I said, no, come on. What's your happiest moment? So they finally, the ice breaks. And, well, I guess it was here. And they both start to smile. I'm like, oh, tell me more about it. And I dig in and I ask lots of questions. I spend more time on that than anything else that first session. But then I usually end with this question. Do you want to recapture that love today? That joy today? Because a truly alive heart will embrace the past and it will help set the course for the future. And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, I guess we do. Maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought it was. Good, now we're making progress. A heart sees the good God has allowed in the past and welcomes it, embraces it. Truly alive heart continues from this point here. A truly alive heart gives vigor to the present. Gives vigor to the present. That means enthusiasm or energy. A truly alive heart makes the mistake. A truly alive heart sees the mistakes you've made through the lens of God's grace. Those mistakes from your past don't define you today. Yes, it might have consequences that still follow you to this day. If you committed a crime and you ended up in jail and it was a felony and now you got to write it on every time you fill out a job application, yeah, that's going to follow you and that's just a reality. But it does not prevent you from being loved by God. And a truly alive heart understands God's grace has forgiven you. And this will give you the passion you need to live each day to the fullest. It will allow you to live each day with carpe diem, seize the day. And I think it's safe to say we all need a little bit more enthusiasm as we go about each day. We all need a little bit more positive energy. And a truly alive heart will do that for you. In Ephesians chapter 5, it says, live each day as a child of God. When you realize the God of the universe wants a personal relationship with you, it will give you what you need to live with vigor in the present. All right, let's go with one more here. A truly alive heart delights in the future. A truly alive heart delights in the future. Reminds me of the story of a lovely old lady, just turned 90 years old in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her name was Helen. And she had finally decided she had enough of those cold winters and it was time to retire completely, sell the house, move down south. And so she went to Miami. And she gets there and she meets a very young and enthusiastic realtor who takes her from house to house, showing her all the best places to live. And finally they get to one house and she's taking Helen around and she tells Helen, you're going to love this house. In 10 years, the value will double. And Helen said, honey, at my age, I don't even buy green bananas. You know, age has a way of changing your perspective on time. When we're younger, we feel like life would go on forever. But every year, you come more to more grips with the idea that life is short and every day is to be savored. But for the heart that has embraced Jesus, you can delight in your future. It doesn't matter if you are 25 years old with terminal cancer or 95 years old in a nursing home. The truly alive heart delights in what God has prepared for us. Here's what we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. When you embrace that truth in your heart, you can delight in the future. While this world is uncertain, and it's very uncertain, you can delight in the future God has prepared. We have a God who has prepared a wonderful place for us. And you embrace that, and it will bring you more peace in your life than you can imagine. And people always want to know what the future holds. People always want to know what the future holds. Dorothy wanted to know. The Tin Man wanted to know. They all wanted to know. And if they'd known the challenges they would go through, would they have continued the journey? I don't know. Reminds me of the story of a frog. A frog wanted to know the future. He was scared. He was lonely. He wanted to know if he was ever going to finally meet someone. So he went to a fortune teller who had a crystal ball. And he asked her, will I ever meet someone who loves me? And she gazed in that crystal ball and she says, oh, I do see a woman in your life. And the frog perked up. Ooh, tell me more. She will be infatuated with you. She will want to know every detail about you. She won't be able to keep her hands off you. And now the frog's excited. He goes, oh boy, where am I going to meet her? Am I at a singles club? What's going on? And the fortune teller looks a little bit farther and the crystal ball says, biology class. See, if you don't have Jesus in your life, that's kind of what the future looks like at the end of the road. It doesn't look very pretty. But as the worship team joins me on stage, I want to draw you to the future text of the Bible. And that's in Revelation chapter 21. In Revelation chapter 21, it says, God is preparing a place for us where there's no more death, mourning, crying, or pain, for those things will be done away with. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty good to me. And that can be the story of all of our future. All we have to do is trust Jesus with your mind and your heart. The way you express it is through belief, repentance, baptism, and you try to follow Jesus. It's really not more complicated than that. And so this morning, if you've not taken those steps of belief yet, if your heart has not fully embraced the love of Jesus, don't delay any longer. If you're online, I encourage you to connect with me today or later this week. And if you're here in person, you can simply begin to make that decision by meeting me down front as we stand and as we sing.